and then men began to call on the name of the Lord. And so what we're finding is we've got some who are following Cain that are very worldly. They are not following the Lord. They're Cain's descendants. And then we have the descendants of Seth, and they are following the Lord. And by the way, our Lord comes through the lineage of Seth. And so then we have in chapter 5 bits and pieces of information about various ones. And some we have a little more information than others. But he talks about in Genesis chapter 5 and verse 2, he created them, male and female, and blessed them and called them mankind in the day they were created. And so here we have the beginning. He called them mankind in the day that they were created. And so we go through, and just to sort of hit the highlights, Adam, remember there was Cain and Abel, but Cain killed Abel. And another child comes that we are told about named Seth. Now remember, Adam had other children, sons and daughters. We're just not given their record. But Adam had Seth. Seth had Enos. Enos had Kenan. And Kenan had Mahalalel. Mahalalel had Jared. And Jared had Enoch. Now there's various pieces of information that we are given about those. But Enoch is one that must have been quite a person. It says in chapter 5 and verse 21, Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. After he begat Methuselah, Enoch walked with God 300 years and had sons and daughters. Here again, we're not told who they are. But it says, let me find my place here. In verse 24. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Here is one of the very few people. There were two people in the Bible that did not die. One was Enoch, the other Elijah. And so he walked with God in such a perfect way that God took him. And then Enoch, remember we said Methuselah. Methuselah has the honor, you might say, of living longer than anyone else ever lived. In fact, in verse 27, so all the days of Methuselah were 969 years and he died. Can you imagine living 969 years? But at that time in man's history, God was allowing them to live longer. It is thought that the reason would be that would help populate the earth and have more people. And it goes back to where did Cain get his wife? Well, there were other people born to Adam and Eve that we're not told about. So from Methuselah, there was Lamech. Lamech's claim to fame, you might say, is that he had a son named Noah. Now that name sounds familiar, doesn't it? Noah. And that's who we will start talking about the next time that we are together. Because now we have finished the first period of time, which is before the flood. Well, now we will talk about the flood. Very interesting details that we'll cover that perhaps you have not thought about before. Now let's just very briefly, now we've got a minute or two or so, and let's go back over our outline. I think it's just very worthwhile for you to get the Bible story in a nutshell in your mind and then start filling in the details. We had before the flood, we've just covered that. Next would be the flood. Then it's the scattering of the people. God had said when Noah and his 3 sons and their wives got off the ark, I want you to fill the earth. Well, he wanted them to go and repopulate the earth, but they all wanted to stay together. And so God decides, I've got to come down and scatter the people. He confused their language and forced them to move away from each other. And so we have before the flood, and the scattering of the people. And then God starts dealing with man through the heads of the families that we call the patriarchs, father rule. Abraham being the first notable of those. And then Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons. The next to the youngest was Joseph. Joseph ends up in the land of Egypt, and he ends up bringing his family to the land of Egypt. Well, then that's the period of the patriarchs. That covers it covers all of Genesis, but the period of time starts in about Genesis chapter 11. And so from Genesis 11 to Genesis 50 covers the patriarchs. That's our study. in a nutshell. Well, then after they get down into Egypt, a Pharaoh comes along that does not know Joseph, has no regard for all the good that Joseph did in Egypt, and he puts the children of Israel in bondage. They cry out to God. God sends them a deliverer named Moses. Moses leads his people out. They have an exodus. They exit Egypt. But they sinned. And God causes them to wander in the wilderness. And so we have the Exodus and then the wandering in the wilderness. They do this for 40 years. And then it's time. It's time to go in now and take the land. They have the invasion and conquest of the land. Under Joshua's leadership now, they go into the promised land, the land of Canaan, and they conquer it. But then Joshua dies and those who were serving with him, and a period of time comes that's called the Judges. God would raise up various men and one woman to lead them out of some persecution they were experiencing, and then to judge the people for a period of time. Then they come to a time that they decide they don't want to be under judges anymore, the last one being Samuel. They want a king. And so God gives them a king, and we have what's called the United Kingdom. Well, the very fact that we say United Kingdom says there's a divided kingdom, doesn't it? And so from the divided kingdom, and then one of those two halves are taken captive, and it leaves Judah all by herself, Judah alone. And then Judah is captured. So we have her but then we have her returning. And that brings us through the end of the Old Testament, just very quickly, wasn't it? And so I encourage you to be back with us again next time. We want to seek the old past, and we want to learn valuable lessons from the Old Testament. And now again, if you haven't ordered your workbook, do that, because we're going to be looking at it and going a little faster now as we leave this period of time and go on forward. Seek the old past, where the good way is, and walk in it.